There was a train in France that had no wheels, 84 feet long, 10 feet wide, seated for 80 passengers. It did not roll. It did not slide. It floated, lifted off its track by nothing but compressed air. A thin cushion of it, barely an inch, separating 12 tons of vehicle from a concrete beam. Steel never touched steel. The whole thing rode on a breath of air and nothing else. At the rear, a ducted propeller 7.5 feet across, 7 blades of variable pitch, driven by twin turbo shaft engines, producing 3,200 combined horsepower. Later, they bolted a Pratt & Whitney JT 8D turbofan to the roof, the same engine that powered the Boeing 727, and pointed it backward. The machine looked like someone had crossed an airliner fuselage with a hovercraft and mounted the result on a concrete monorail 30 feet above a French wheat field. On the 5th of March 1974, it reached 267 miles per hour. That is faster than any TGV in regular commercial service today. The French high-speed train would not match that number until 1989, 15 years later. The pilot said they could have gone faster. The track was simply too short. We'll come back to that. The vehicle was called the Aérotrain. The man who built it was a 57-year-old aviation engineer named Jean Bertin. And if you want to see what is left of his life's work, drive north from Orléans on the D2020, past the commercial zones and the flat agricultural land that stretches toward the Beauce. You will see it. You can't miss it. 11 miles of elevated concrete guideway running in a dead straight line through the fields, supported by 900 reinforced concrete pillars, 33 feet above the ground. An inverted T-shaped rail, pale gray, weathered, covered in places with ivy and graffiti, stretching from the town of Saran to the village of Rouen, with a platform at Chevely in the middle, where a hangar once stood. It looks like a Roman aqueduct designed by someone who had read too much science fiction. It looks like the skeleton of a future that died before it was born. It carries nothing now. No vehicle has touched that rail since December 1977. A section was demolished in 2007 to make way for the A19 motorway. The rest simply stands there, too expensive to tear down, too strange to ignore. In 2017, the French state classified it as 20th century heritage. The concrete is listed. The machine that was supposed to ride on it was burned to the ground by an arsonist in 1992, a few days before it was to be moved to a museum. Nobody was ever charged. This is the story of how it got here, and why it stopped, and what it means that the concrete is still standing. We bring back the days when the journey meant just as much as the destination. The ships, the trains, the stories worth remembering. If you would like to come along for the ride, subscribe. We have got more of these waiting for you. Now let us continue. The man who built it was born in a village with a name that sounds like a fairy tale, Druys-les-Belles-Fontaines, beautiful fountains, a medieval commune in the Yonne department of Burgundy, stone houses, cobbled streets, a ruined castle on a hill, natural springs that give the village its name. Jean Bertin was born there on the 5th of September 1917 while the Great War was still grinding through its 3rd year. He was brilliant. Polytechnique, class of 1938, the École Nationale Supérieure de l'Aéronautique, graduating in 1943 in the middle of another war. By 1944, he was working at SNECMA, the national aircraft engine manufacturer, where he rose to deputy technical director. He understood engines the way some people understand music, not as collections of parts, but as expressions of force and heat and motion, as problems to be solved with elegance. In 1955, at 38, he left SNECMA and founded his own company, Bertin et Cie. Over the next 20 years, it would file 3,000 patents. 3,000. The man was a factory of ideas. But there was one idea in particular, one discovery made not by Bertin himself, but by one of his engineers, that would consume the rest of his life. In 1957, an engineer named Louis Duthian was working on an aircraft engine test at the Bertin workshops when he noticed something. When a flat surface moved close to the ground at speed, the compressed air beneath it generated far more lift than anyone expected. Ground effect. The phenomenon was known to pilots. It was not new, but Duthian saw it fresh, and Bertin saw something in Duthian's observation that nobody else did. What if you could ride on that cushion? Not in the air, not on the water, but on the ground. What if you could build a vehicle that floated above a track on nothing but compressed air, touching nothing, grinding against nothing, free from the friction that limited every wheeled vehicle ever built? The air cushion patent was filed on the 17th of January, 1961. 2 years later, at the military base at Satori, Bertin demonstrated a wheelless military transport called the Terraplane BC-4 to the press in 1963. It skimmed across the ground on a cushion of air, kicking up dust and possibilities. Bertin later said that the Terraplane patent was the birth certificate of the Aérotrain. By the early 1960s, France needed a high-speed answer. Japan's Shinkansen had begun service in 1964 at 130 miles per hour. French railways were losing passengers to roads and airlines. The SNCF, the National Railway Company, wanted to make existing trains faster. Bertin wanted to throw out the wheels entirely. He pitched the Aérotrain to the Paris Transport Authority in 1963. They turned him down. He pitched it to the SNCF. They were interested briefly, then backed away when they realized it would require entirely new infrastructure they did not control. Finally, he went to DATAR, a powerful planning agency under Georges Pompidou's modernizing government. DATAR liked bold ideas. In 1965, they gave Bertin funding, and the Société d'études de l'Aérotrain was born. The first test track was built along an abandoned railway line 15 miles south of Paris. 4 miles of concrete guideway ran through quiet countryside. The first prototype, Aérotrain 01, was a half-scale model, 33 feet long, powered by a 260-horsepower aircraft engine driving a 3-bladed propeller. On the 21st of February, 1966, in front of the press, it reached 62 miles per hour. Days later, it reached 124 miles per hour. A second prototype followed. Aérotrain 02 was smaller, sleeker, designed purely for speed testing. In May 1967, it hit 186 miles per hour. In January 1969, with a rocket booster strapped to the frame, it reached 262 miles per hour on a 4-mile test track in the Paris suburbs. No wheeled train on Earth had gone that fast. The world noticed. The U.S. Secretary of Transportation came to France for a test ride. Rohr Industries, an American aerospace company, licensed the technology in 1969. Representatives from 18 countries visited. Richard Nixon sent a special advisor to ride the thing in 1971. France issued a postage stamp in the Aérotrain's honor in 1970. For a few years in the late 1960s, Bertin's floating train was the most exciting piece of transport technology on Earth. And then came the full-size machine, the one from the beginning of this story, the I-80. Let's step inside. You boarded from the platform at Chevilly, 33 feet above the surrounding farmland. The platform was a concrete structure, functional, industrial, nothing glamorous about it. But the vehicle itself, sitting on the inverted T-rail, was something else. Smooth, aerodynamic, windows running along both sides, and that enormous ducted fan at the rear, like the intake of a jet engine turned backward. It looked like the future had arrived 10 years early and parked itself on a concrete beam above a wheat field. You climbed in through a side door. The interior was sparse by airline standards but recognizable. Rows of passenger seats, a center aisle, overhead luggage space. It looked like a regional airliner. It felt like nothing on Earth. When the compressors spooled up, you heard them first. A rising whine, mechanical, insistent. 12 of them, 6 blowing downward to lift the vehicle, 6 blowing sideways to keep it centered on the rail. Then you felt it. The vehicle shifted beneath you, a subtle lifting sensation. Not dramatic, but unmistakable. The way an elevator begins to rise before you're quite sure it's moving. The Aérotrain had left the rail. Not by much. About an inch of compressed air separated the vehicle from the concrete T-beam. But that inch was everything. You were floating. Then the main engines engaged, and the propeller began to bite. The acceleration was immediate and surprisingly smooth. No jolting, no wheel clatter, no rail joints. The Aérotrain didn't ride over its track the way a train rides over rails. It flew along it. The absence of mechanical contact meant the absence of vibration, the absence of rhythmic noise, the absence of everything your body expected from a ground vehicle. What reached you instead was wind, the sound of air being pushed aside at enormous speed, and the propeller, that 7-bladed fan behind you, producing a deep thrumming roar that passengers described as somewhere between a hovercraft and a turboprop aircraft. It was loud. Nobody pretended otherwise. The gas turbine prototypes created tremendous noise both inside and outside the vehicle, enough that speeds would need to be reduced in urban areas. This was one of the most effective arguments SNCF made against the system. They already had trains that could travel at reduced urban speeds, they pointed out. Why build new infrastructure for a vehicle that could only demonstrate its advantage in open countryside? But in the open countryside, on that 11-mile stretch of elevated guideway between Saran and Rouen, the I-80 was extraordinary. At 155 miles per hour, the farmland blurred beneath you. The concrete pillars flicked past like fence posts. You were 30 feet above the fields, close enough to see individual furrows in the plowed earth, close enough to watch a tractor crawl along a road below, but moving at a speed that made everything terrestrial feel sluggish and earthbound. And the track ran alongside the Paris-Orléans railway line. The SNCF tracks were right there, visible through the windows, carrying conventional trains at conventional speeds. If you were aboard the Aérotrain at full velocity and a regular passenger train was running on those parallel rails, you would have overtaken it the way a sports car overtakes a bicycle. The symbolism was hard to miss. The future, floating 30 feet above the present. The old technology running on steel. The new one running on air. On the 5th of March 1974, the I-80 came back. Rebuilt as the I-80HV with that Pratt & Whitney turbofan from the opening of this story, bolted to the roof, it set out along the Orléans guideway one more time, and it reached 267 miles per hour. The record we started with. The record that still stands today for any air cushion vehicle on land. The pilot said what we already know. Faster was possible. The track ran out first. By 1974, the Aérotrain should have been unstoppable. It had the speed record. It had international interest. It had a signed government contract to build the first commercial line, a suburban route from the new town of Cergy-Pontoise to the business district of La Défense on the western edge of Paris. Bertin had even developed the S44, a quieter suburban prototype powered by a linear induction motor instead of turbines, specifically designed for urban routes where noise was unacceptable. And then everything fell apart, not all at once, not dramatically, the way a building subsides when the foundations are quietly removed one by one. The SNCF had never wanted the Aérotrain. This is the thing you have to understand. The National Railway Company had no research and development department of its own in the early 1960s, and it watched with something between jealousy and alarm as an outsider, an aviation engineer from Burgundy, proposed to replace its entire high-speed future with a technology the SNCF did not build, did not control, and could not integrate with its existing network. Because that was the TGV's decisive advantage, and the SNCF knew it. A TGV train ran on standard gauge steel rails. It could use dedicated high-speed track between cities, and then continue onto conventional railway lines to reach city centers, stations, and destinations beyond the high-speed corridor. The Aérotrain could not. Every mile of Aérotrain route required new elevated concrete guideway. Every city needed new stations. Every connection to the existing network required passengers to change vehicles. The TGV could go everywhere. The Aérotrain could only go where its track had been built. This was a real limitation. It was not manufactured opposition. The SNCF was right that integration mattered, that passengers valued through service, that building entirely new infrastructure across France would be staggering in cost. The irony is that the SNCF was also right that high-speed rail was the future. The question was whose version of that future would prevail. Then came the oil crisis. In October 1973, the Arab oil embargo quadrupled the price of petroleum. The timing was devastating. The Aérotrain's high-speed prototypes ran on gas turbines, burning kerosene, consuming fuel at rates that suddenly looked ruinous. The TGV prototype also ran on gas turbines initially, but the SNCF engineers made a critical pivot. They switched to electric traction, drawing power from overhead catenary wires fed by France's rapidly expanding nuclear power program. The Aérotrain had no equivalent solution. The high-speed version needed its turbines. The suburban S44 used electric linear motors for propulsion, but still required an internal combustion engine to generate the air cushion. Neither version could simply plug into the grid the way a conventional electric train could. The ground shifted beneath Bertin's feet. And then, on the 2nd of April 1974, Georges Pompidou died. Pompidou had been the Aérotrain's political patron. His government was a government of modernizers, of grand projects, of bold infrastructure. Centre Pompidou, Tour Montparnasse, Boulevard Périphérique. He understood what Bertin was doing and believed in it. With his death, the presidency passed to Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, a man of different temperament and different connections. Within weeks of taking office, Giscard annulled the Cergy La Défense contract. The route that was supposed to carry the Aérotrain into commercial service was handed to SNCF instead. Today, Cergy-Pontoise is served by RERA, a conventional electric commuter railway. The journey takes about 30 minutes with 7 intermediate stops. The Aérotrain would have made it in under 10 minutes. There is a detail about Giscard d'Estaing that appears in multiple accounts of this story, and it is worth stating plainly. His wife was the granddaughter of Eugene Schneider, founder of the Schneider Group, an industrial conglomerate with deep ties to French railway manufacturing and steel production. Whether this connection influenced the decision to cancel the Aérotrain is a matter of speculation, not proven fact. But the people who spent their lives building Bertin's machine had their own views on the subject. Jean Bertin understood the Aérotrain was finished. He had fought for it for over a decade. He had filed the patents, built the prototypes, broken the records, demonstrated the technology to 18 countries, and watched it all dissolve in a few months. He was already sick with brain cancer. The diagnosis came as the political ground gave way beneath his life's work. Jean Bertin died on the 21st of December 1975 at Neuilly-sur-Seine. He was 58 years old. His New York Times obituary noted that his company had filed 3,000 patents in 20 years. The Aérotrain was the one he cared about most. The I-80 made its last trip on the 27th of December, 1977. After that, the prototypes were stored. The test tracks fell silent. The concrete guideway north of Orléans began its slow transformation from engineering marvel to industrial ruin. Grass growing through the joints, ivy climbing the pillars, graffiti accumulating on surfaces that had once been spotless. And then someone set them on fire. On the 17th of July, 1991, the S-44 Suburban prototype was destroyed by fire in its storage facility at Gomez-la-Ville. The cause was never conclusively determined. On the 22nd of March, 1992, the I-80, the record-breaking intercity prototype, the machine that had carried 80 passengers at 267 miles per hour on a cushion of compressed air, was destroyed by arson at Chevrolet. It happened days before the vehicle was scheduled to be transferred to a museum. Days before. The arsonist was never identified. The former mayor of Saran, Michel Guérin, later said publicly that he had his own ideas about who was responsible. He did not elaborate. Nobody was ever charged. The machine that proved the Aérotrain worked, the machine that held the world speed record, the physical evidence of 15 years of engineering and hope, was reduced to a burned shell in a field beside the track it had once flown along. Of the 4 prototypes built in France, 2 survive. They are stored in Versailles by the Association des Amis de Jean Bertin, a group of former engineers and enthusiasts who keep the memory alive. They are the small ones, the half-scale test models. The full-size machines are gone. The American prototype, the Rohr Industries UTCV, built under Bertin's license for the United States Department of Transportation, sits at the Pueblo Railway Museum in Colorado. It is the only full-size Aérotrain left anywhere on Earth. It reached 145 miles per hour on a track that was too short to show what it could do. Its program ran out of funding in 1975, the same year Bertin died. The TGV entered commercial service in 1981. It is by any measure a success. France has one of the finest high-speed rail networks in Europe. The trains are fast, reliable, and deeply integrated with the conventional railway system. The decision to back the TGV over the Aérotrain was not irrational. It may even have been correct. But correctness and completeness are not the same thing. The TGV travels at 200 miles per hour in regular service. The Aérotrain hit 267 miles per hour in 1974, on a track that was too short to find out how much faster it could go. The TGV carries 500 passengers. The I-80 carried 80 passengers. The TGV runs on tracks that connect to the entire French railway network. The Aérotrain needed its own dedicated guideway for every route. Each of those facts is true, and none of them quite explains why the prototypes were set on fire. None of them explains why the I-80 was burned days before it could be saved. None of them explains the particular cruelty of destroying the evidence, of erasing the physical proof that the thing existed and worked, and held the world speed record. Because a machine in a museum is a question. It sits there on its plinth, and it asks, quietly, permanently, what would have happened if you had let me run? And some questions are more comfortable when the evidence has been removed. The concrete is still there. You can drive past it on the D2020. You can walk beneath it. You can stand at the platform at Saran and look along 11 miles of elevated rail stretching toward the horizon, carrying nothing, waiting for nothing. And you can feel what it must have felt like to stand here in September 1969 when the I-80 climbed aboard for the first time, and the compressors spooled up, and the thing lifted, actually lifted, and began to move. A cushion of AIR, a concrete beam, an engineer from a village called Beautiful Fountains who believed the future of ground transport was to leave the ground. He was 58 years old when he died. The record still stands. The concrete still stands. The machines are gone. We've talked about the Aérotrain. We've talked about the politics, the fire, the concrete. If you want to see how another lost machine almost changed the future of flight, that video is on screen now.